Good afternoon, everybody. On behalf of Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce and Openreach, welcome to the next event as part of the Edinburgh Business Festival. Openreach are delighted to sponsor today's Technology, Data and the Future of Business panel, and hope that over the course of the afternoon, we all get to get better insight and understanding into the role of innovation, data and tech in the future of business, coupled with exploring a little bit how we change our mindsets, adapt our innovative models, and also help make sure that we really understand and our eyes fully wide open to what's in front of us in terms of the emerging technologies. We're already all part of the next big revolution, being digital, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about how we integrate the businesses to maximize the impact that we can make. Today, we're going to hear from Melinda Matthews, CEO of CodeClan. We've got Ved Sen, a digital evangelist and business innovation lead. We've got Richie Somerville, head of strategy, data, and involved in the Driven Innovation Programme at the University of Edinburgh. But firstly, though, I'm going to hand over to George Baxter, the Chief Executive of Edinburgh Innovation Limited, who will be chair for this afternoon and look after us over the next 90 minutes. All I'll say is please ask lots of questions in the chat box. They'll be raised during and at the end of the session, and I really look forward to enjoy the next 90 minutes. Take care, thank you, and over to you, George.
Thanks very much, Robert. It's been very much an Openreach week for me. We're doing this, sponsored by Openreach, and then woke up on Monday and found 4 Openreach staff in the garden, laying cable through the garden, which was quite a nice surprise. So we'll soon be upgrading to fibre. That'll be nice. So University of Edinburgh, Edinburgh Innovations, we are the commercialisation company for the University of Edinburgh. We handle all of the intellectual property, spin-out startups and business engagement for the university, as well as consultancy. So that's where our role is. We help bring venture capital into startups and spin-outs around the university as well. So that's to put in context to what my role is there as Chief Executive. As Robert mentioned, we have it's been an incredible year for technology. And just before we started, the speakers and we were talking about what some of the opportunities could be over the next few years, given the huge change we've had in the past year. Most of us working from home, the impact of COVID, how data has been absolutely critical in our interpretation of what's happening in the pandemic and what we should do about that as well. So the mantra is now data, not dates. How much that's actually been enforced in reality, we'll see over the next couple of months. But certainly, I'm sure it's the approach that most of us would support. It's about acting on the data, not having some arbitrary dates which come through and drive policy. So we've been heavily engaged, which we'll hear more from Ritchie particularly later, heavily engaged in establishing Edinburgh, hopefully, as the data capital of Europe over a programme over the next 10 years. And I think this webinar is a really part of the sort of key component of that, is really to talk about the impact of data, the impact of technology, and the impact of innovation. So no more of me rambling on. I'm going to hand over to each of the speakers in turn to give a sort of 5-minute opening remark and their initial views on the topic. So Ved, could you lead us off, please?
Thanks, George. And it's a pleasure to be here. I wish I was in Edinburgh in person. It is certainly one of my favorite cities. But just since we can't, this is the first time I've actually worn a proper shirt instead of a hoodie in the last 6 months. So that's my nod to just sort of not being there in person. But yeah, this is a great opportunity, and I'm really delighted that we're looking at data as the axis, because I think there's a lot to discuss there. But let me start by taking you back maybe a year. Like we've just come up to the anniversary of working from home. So, you know, all of us have Zoom fatigue and we're struggling with a lot of the challenges. But just imagine for a minute that we were going through this experience minus the technology that we depend on every day. You don't have to go very far back. You go back 15 years, 20 years, we're without Facebook, we're without Twitter, we're without, you know, a broadband that, you know, we can have multiple video conferences on. And then we'll be doing this basically by you know, telephone conference calls. We wouldn't be able to see each other. You can imagine, you know, however much we curse the technology, life would have been a lot harder without all the things we kind of take for granted in our lives. And I think shifting from personal experiences to kind of a broader view, I think it was a couple of days ago that the historian Yuval Harari posted a really interesting article on the Financial Times, where he talked about the fact that although travel has kind of dropped off the cliff over the last 12 months, international trade actually has declined only 4% over the pandemic, which is really a remarkable statistic. And it points to the fact that today the world functions on data. And if we can move information around, we can still, life can operate as normal, ships can sail. We at Tata Consultancy Services have clients in the shipping industry who are on the verge of launching autonomous ships. My colleagues at our partner organizations like IBM are working on autonomous ships. So, we are on the cusp of even more amazing things, right? But I think in a lot of organizations, when you talk technology, I think a lot of people, the executives of today, still in their minds and hearts are thinking IT. And I think that's a very dangerous position in today's world. And that's the first thing I think we have to fix. The IT view of technology is a very old-fashioned view. We need to think about technology that actually goes everywhere in our business. Technology is in our products. It's what makes our supply chains work. It's what makes our processes work. In our company of 450,000 people, expense claims, when we were submitting expense claims and travel claims, are all processed without a human being actually looking at the bills. It's only by exception that a human being looks at that. So, today tech is what makes business work. If you're in retail, technology is your customer experience. There is no other customer experience at this point of time right now. So we have to rethink it. And I'm really reminded that what it means to be prescient about this. Jeff Bezos wrote a shareholder letter in the late 90s, where he basically says that in his business, his factors of production are compute, data, and bandwidth. And the price performance of these three, he expects, will double every 18 months or 12 months or 9 months. And he's sure, sitting in 1997, that he is going to dominate the world of retail. And it doesn't matter what category he talks about, the same economics will play out. And I don't think those economics have changed. We sometimes, perhaps in our everyday work, miss the fact that technology is something where economics are kind of reversed. Things get cheaper. Things get better and cheaper at the same time, right? I don't know how many of you remember buying, little pen drives for like 20 pounds that could hold, the enormous amount of 10 meg of data. So, we are of course seeing all of that play out in our organizations and in the world across. And in that, if I throw innovation, which I think is quite central, it would be worthwhile to say we are living in a volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous world, which is what they call VUCA. And they also say that we're saying change will never be this slow again. So whatever we think of change today, this is slow compared to what we'll be thinking about in 10 years' time. So past performance obviously is no guarantor of future success, and that is increasingly true, and it's true faster and faster, which means that innovation has to be a central part of every organization. That could be, and when I say innovation, it doesn't have to be technology. Innovation, depending on the lens, some people kind of think of it as synonymous to tech. Some people think of it as synonymous to design thinking. It's probably at the confluence of all three, of commercial innovation, of technology and design. And that's where the magic happens. And you have to throw a lot of lateral thinking and creativity into that mix as well. And that's the problem, because most organizations today, and this is my challenge that I'd like to throw open for the audience and for the panelists today, companies, most of our organizations are not built around creativity. They're built around repeatability and process and conformance. And when we talk about innovation, we're actually going against that very grain that has made us successful so far. So I think the biggest challenge for us going forward will be this challenge of innovation and how we create spaces for innovation to happen, because they're quite antithetical to all the things we put into our organizations to make them as good as they are today. The repeatability, the process, the kind of cultures, the conformance, all of that. And in that, of course, we'll see marginal innovation, which is the everyday little bits of change that move us forward, and the big picture stuff, which will be occasionally successful, but often will lead us down dead kind of into blind alleys of change as well. So I'll stop there, but this is my kind of opening salvo to say, technology is everywhere and innovation is absolutely going to be the headlights that we'll need to navigate our way forward.
Thanks very much, Ved. Melinda.
Hi, thank you, George. My name is Melinda Matthews-Clarkson. I'm the CEO of CodeClan. CodeClan is an organization that is a key supply chain of the talent that goes into the digital and data workforce in the Scotland country. We love what we do. And in CodeClan, what we want to make sure we do is that we touch the pulse of industry. So this is what differentiates us slightly from, let's say, the universities and some of the other larger size organizations. We can tap into a technology that maybe an industry sees, well, that's really up and coming. We need more people educated on that. Can you sew it into your curriculum? And we do so. But for this conversation around data and innovation, I have 25 years in the field of data, mostly from selling it, databases and tools and applications. But data really is just the heart, it's the pulse. So if Ved's conversation here is that technology, more like an IT infrastructure, it's really where we would think of electricity, almost a guaranteed right that we have. And what data is doing, the more people that understand the power of data or the hunger for data, we all have. Remember when COVID first came out, we were measuring all sorts of things. And now as a global economy, we are tuned into the data numbers and how they move. We're looking at graphs and charts and pies and all those to the common everybody at home. But what I still think we need to do is get the broader workforce to understand the power of data, how to collect it. Are we collecting the right things? And also asking it questions, right? So we tend to ask the data questions that we know the answer to, or we want the answer to. And it's very easy sometimes to manipulate data to get to the answer that you want to get to. But I think now we're there's so much out there for us to use to be innovative and creative for the new world ahead. The data will be the core element of that. And all us, whether we are leaders, professionals, workers, or someone that's just working on their data literacy, I think we all have a role to play in the future of the world that we're going to work in, live in, and play in, and make it the art of the possible. Because I know we all feel right now very locked down and a bit sour and dour, but we will have an opportunity really soon, and there's people already working it. But once we get lifted up here, all the things that we have learned through this last year, we can put to good use and become a very innovative and creative economy. So that is me. I'll hand it back to you, George.
Okay, thanks very much, Linda. Richie.
Thank you, George. So I'm Richie Somerville. I am the head of strategy for the Data-Driven Innovation Programme at the University of Edinburgh. We're a 10-year programme funded through the Edinburgh and South East Scotland City Region deal. Slightly unusual way of funding being offered to a university. And we're operating in that space where we want to help the fundamental research that the university is world renowned for have impact in society faster. And by that, I mean, be able to be translated into practice in ways that are meaningful for businesses and for the customers of those businesses. And we're doing that through 5 innovation centres being built between Edinburgh University and our sister university, the Heriot-Watt. And we do it through engagement. We have an acronym TRADE. So talent, research, adoption, data, and entrepreneurship. And it's really about how we help grow the tech ecosystem that exists in Edinburgh, to be honest, across Scotland, and make the most of that we can. And obviously with the year that we've all just gone through, and I appreciate for businesses that are dialed in on this chat, we've all experienced pain in how we operate, how we satisfy our customers, how we keep the lights on. And it's really about, I suppose, what I'm going to talk about is how I think we can take some steps back towards that. And for me, rather than it just being about technology, data, and the future of business, we've got to remember to think about people, change, and customer fulfillment. So as the other two speakers have already referenced, there's an educational piece we've all got to go through about the use of certain terms that can be quite off-putting. So I've come to realize that when I talk about data, about half the room's eyes switch off. And in reality, what we're really talking about is information. Some of that is raw information, some of it is informed or amended information, but it's, for a business, data is about, if I want to fulfill a customer's need, how do I do that as effectively as I can? What do I need to know? Who needs to know it? How do I get it into the right hands and ensure the right actions happen? And what we're on the cusp of at the moment, in terms of a number of technologies, are things that are disrupting, as Ved said, that desire of a business to continue to deliver to conformity practices, to one where they're having to reimagine themselves. And it's that classic change challenge that you need to almost acknowledge that you are consciously incompetent at certain new ways of operating and then move through it. So it's a bit like learning to drive. That day, if you were unfortunate like me, where one of your parents took you out into the car and you went, okay, how does this work? Through to the point where you get in a car and you don't consciously think about it. You are doing lots of practices without imagining it. So from my perspective, I think we've got two big things. One is connection. So how do we connect with our customers, with our supply chains, within our businesses, to the knowledge that sits often trapped in them? And the other is collaboration. How do I get them to start to work together? How do I work with partners, whether that's virtually, as we've seen this type of thing sort of evidencing? And I suppose we were chatting last week about this. For me, there's an amazing thing. If you had got most people together 2 years ago and said to them, almost every organization that is in an information focused business environment will move entirely online in 2 years' time. Their staff will all work from home and all of their business and their engagement with their customers will be virtual. You would have been laughed out of court. But because of a context that we found ourselves in, that is how the vast majority of certainly knowledge-based companies have moved. For those who need that direct connection with customer, what they've done is they've found innovative ways to hijack some of that activity and make it work. So it would not have been in most restaurateurs' idea to have a takeaway service beside their restaurant service, because that would have necessarily not been seen as brand appropriate. But we've seen amazing work done by restaurants all over the city to maintain that relationship with their customers, which is something that's really difficult because people want to support places that are emotionally important to them. And I think we've got to think about that. As I say, it's that connection and collaboration, for me, gives us a really interesting way of reimagining what our business strategies might be as we pull out of where we currently are. But I'll leave it there for us to take forward the conversation.
Okay. Thanks very much, Richie, and thanks to the other speakers. I'm in the fortunate position now to get to ask some questions. I'm normally on the other side of the questions, that's quite nice to be on this side for a change. I'll start off with something which has always intrigued me. If you talk to many economists, and in fact I saw a presentation from the OECD's lead economist a couple of years ago on this, one of the real dichotomies facing the developed world is the fact that despite all of this technology, IT, data, etc., the rise in productivity is basically slowed down, almost stopped. So I'd be interested in the panel's opinion on that, which is, are we not using technology right? Do we have the wrong technology? Does it not add to productivity? Or as Chairman Mao said, is it too early to tell? So I'm going to ask, I'll go first of all to Ved. I'm sure you'll have an opinion on that, Ved.
Ved, you're on mute.
Yeah, Ved, you're on mute.
As you said that, I realized that, so but thank you. I was going to say this is a very large area. I think the world we're in today, there are two forces I'd like to call out as a response. The first is, are we actually trying for labor productivity? So a very simple example is if you have a factory with 1,000 employees and you give them tools so that, with 900 employees, you can make the same number of cars, you're probably increasing productivity. If you convert that factory into one where 100 employees and 50 big machines make the same number of cars, that's not a productivity. You can't say we've increased the productivity of those 100 employees. It's a misnomer. And I think, as others have pointed out, I think we've shifted to a world where capital is, for better or worse, the primary input. And so I think there's more investment going into capital productivity than to labor productivity. Because when you've gotten to a world where your factory can run with 100 people, the focus no longer is on how productive those 100 people are. It's more important probably for the system to be clear about how productive those 50 machines are. Mm-hmm. I don't think that, obviously there is a value there, social value, which is lost. And I'm not commenting on that for this discussion, but I think that's part of the reason why labor productivity may have stalled. And of course, the other side of it is simply that this plays out in different ways in different parts of the world. So there are probably parts of the world where deeply manual processes in agriculture are still seeing the increase in productivity, but when you aggregate them across the world, they don't show up as such. So I think there are probably parts where productivity is still a big issue and it is improving.
Okay, thank you. Richie?
From my perspective, it's one of those classic conundrums about, I suppose, two aspects. One is right tool, right job, which is, and the thing with technology is technology changes the context, not just the activity. So, it's the classic, don't use a hammer to put a screw in. But if the hammer changes how you should imagine fixing something to the wall completely, then productivity becomes a challenge because you've got to try and reimagine something that actually is something that you're often emotionally committed to in organizations. They have their way of doing things, and changing that can be tricky. The second bit, it plays to the sort of productivity point that Ved made, which is around the diminishing returns of marginal gains. That we're probably seeing productivity happening most where people can completely reimagine how a particular industry can operate. So if we, at the university, we've got an awful lot of work at the moment with organizations who are looking at fintech. Many of the fintech challenger banks, the productivity rating they would have would be significantly higher than a mature bank, because they've not had to start with the same capital, sunk cost, high street presence, etc. So I do wonder whether some of the challenges that the economists need to come up with a new model, as much as
the question's wrong. Question's wrong. Yeah. No, that's a good point. Good point, Richie. Melinda.
So actually, asking the data the wrong question, isn't it, there in your comment? So one of the things that I've noticed as an international individual, and my job beforehand was very international, to Ved's point, is that around the world, there's different levels of productivity. There's also different levels of acceptance of technology. But I think Richie's point was somewhat on it. I would go with time, focus, and outcome. So the amount of time to learn a new productivity tool might be just, hey, I could just get it done the old-fashioned way. And I think there's a big gap right now between technologists that know how to use 55,000 tools to do this, this, and this, and others just the common, like me. I work with so many technology gadget guys, gadget guys and girls, but that doesn't mean that those gadgets are going to make me more productive, because I don't have the emotional investment to play with 15 tools, right? I just want one, right? My job and my life are very different. So that gap between tools for high productivity and how to learn those, I think sometimes we miss a big step on why. Will this bring the outcome Is it outcome based? I can get more done in a day, but does that mean I'm going to have more to do? Right? So there's this cycle of, if I get it done, I get more. So some of the tools I think that are out there are fabulous, and we've all been thrown into them, right? I mean, I never used Zoom before this many times, and now I'm learning all sorts of new gadgets on it. Has it made my life more productive? No. Do I just have to put on more makeup and look better every day? Yes. So some of these tools don't always add value, but they do add some type of level of productivity. So I do think there's a big gap, and we talked about this as a pre-group, between the kids that are really technical savvy, or the individuals that live a life of technology, versus the I'll call it the common worker, and the technology, the terms, the jargons, how do I use it, and why? Why will it help me as an individual versus just helping the company give me more and ratchet it through?
Yeah. Okay, thanks very much. So my equivalent of putting on makeup is occasionally trimming my beard, but that's as far as I go. Thank goodness I don't need to go on makeup. Just to pick up the international point, Melinda, I think that's very interesting. I was going to ask each of the panelists, and I'll come straight back to you there, Melinda. If you look at it, if you look at the work we're trying to do on the Edinburgh City region innovation ecosystem, we all talk about innovation ecosystems. So can you think of somewhere in the world outside of the usual, outside of Boston and Stanford, you know, who would you point to as an exemplar and say they're doing it right? You've been really impressed. I mean, well, I won't say who I think, but I'll maybe mention that when you've had your go. But who should we be looking to as exemplars, Melinda?
So you mean like
and the use of technology and data for
that come all together and share,
or just not just in terms of, I think, financial or economic growth, but social good as well. So who's doing a good job out there?
Well, the first one that actually just jumped to my head is Israel. I mean, they have an amazing innovation hub. They do, and they tend to create applications, or I'll call it sub-applications, that go into other things. So, you know, when you walk into some of the hotels or restaurants or something, and the floor, as you step on it, bubbles, and, you know, that was one of those type of things that came out of an innovation center in Israel. And they do a great deal of collaboration and sharing. Mm-hmm. So if I had to pick one outside Silicon Valley, you know, Boston, Raleigh, you know, those type of areas, I see them, I'd have to say that they stand out pretty strongly. And Edinburgh does pretty well. One thing about Edinburgh, or in general Scotland, but this tech ecosystem that we're talking about, I think we do a very good idea sharing, very good idea sharing, and very good supportive. You know, I had that problem with that funder. Oh, I'll share my knowledge. And that's really nice. Silicon Valley, they would say, oh, no, I'm not going to tell you, right? Because it's a bit more competitive. Yeah. But I think it's the next stage. I think we're really good at innovation and ideas, but it's taken that to be startup scale up. Like, how do we collaborate to help other people grow and build really key alliances that snap together, almost like molecules that together they're a stronger unit than apart. I think that's our next stage. Okay, yeah, thanks. It's interesting about Edinburgh because it reminds me, those of us who are old enough to remember Richard Florida's work on innovation and the sort of peaks of innovation, and you need to be big enough to have a critical mass, but small enough to get all the key people in one room. Whether that room now is, you know, a Zoom room, but you can get people in, and I think Edinburgh or Scotland, in fact, and I think he used to use the number of about 5 million as a good scale economic unit that was big enough to have an impact, but small enough to so people knew each other. So it was an interesting scale, and I mean, Israel would fall into that category there as well, pretty well. Ved, interested in your views on this.
The name that keeps cropping up in everyday conversations, of course, is Barcelona. Barcelona, I think, has some really interesting examples. But the one I will point to actually is, you know, because, you know, TCS is part of the Tata Group, which is an India-based conglomerate. in all the chaos that is, a large complex democracy like India, there are actually some really clever examples. And your point on social, value reminded me. We've got this set up in a small town called Nasik, where we've created something that we call like a social entrepreneurship square. So we've created kind of a square mile where we invite startups to come in. We provide a data backbone, tools. We work with the local government, and these social ventures then on top of that can sit down and create new ideas that actually have direct, immediate social impact. And that might be to do with, test and trace in the current environment, or it might be with traffic management, in days gone by, and hopefully to come again. But I think those are some interesting examples, and there are quite a few cities in India that are actually quietly behind the scenes doing some really interesting things in terms of creating city kind of data hubs and operational centers that they can go after specific problems. But I do think that that idea of putting the problem first is a good one, because a lot of times you can get caught up with lots of activity, but maybe having a specific thing that you're going after, sustainability, age friendliness, education, whatever it is, I think then focuses this all very nicely.
Okay, thanks very much. Richie?
So if I was looking at a city that might be of a similar scale to Edinburgh, I'd probably look at Helsinki.
Cheers.
So again, very strong collaboration between local government, the university there. Probably the thing that they do best is the ability to do what I suppose some people call living lab activity. So they're working with the community to test whether propositions work, and they avoid trying to do them straight to mass scale. And I think that's affording organizations and communities the time to understand how to adapt rather than adapt to new technologies emerging, whether that's autonomous vehicles moving around, whether it's to do with air quality monitoring and censoring. And we have collaborations with Helsinki that I think are because you can look at an economy like Edinburgh's and how we sit within our city region and within Scotland. It's very similar to Helsinki and how it plays in Finland. And again, some of the parallels, we benefit from a lot of the computing that happened in places like Dundee with ZX Spectrum and others that have spread out and often created the people who've gone on to be that first round of real tech innovators, maybe about 20 years ago in Scotland. It was very similar in Finland with Nokia, and the way that the brain trust they helped create has gone out and created those opportunities. So I would look at that. The other one's the Leuven model, obviously, and you know more about that than I do, George. But again, I think it's, for me, they all come back to, in that place, is there a strong sense of partnership? It's not about one organization leading or controlling. It's about how different groups come together for mutual benefit.
Okay, thanks very much. Yeah, I actually thought Helsinki as well, having been there 3 or 4 times in the last, well, not in the last year, but the year before. Last year just disappears from memory. And I would have said as well, things just seem to work there. And it's an interesting city with a strong city political commitment to innovation as well, and the economic ability to do something about it, which I think in Edinburgh we've got that commitment, but we don't necessarily always have the economic financial ability in the cities to do anything about it. So that's very interesting. I mean, something that came up in that conversation was this thing about inclusivity. It's something which has interested me about inclusive innovation. And by inclusive, I mean all sorts of inclusive: male, female, ethnic minority, sexuality, all types of inclusivity. And I'd be interested in people's views on what effect the last year has had on that. I mean, I've heard 2 sides of the argument. I've heard people say to me, it's been really liberating because I don't need to go to all of these dinners in the evening, which means that I can stay and look after my children, and that's great. And other people saying, well, it's been terrible because I've had to look after the children when they've been off school, and I've not been able to, I've not been able to put 100% into my job, and therefore I think I'm being left out. And that's come from all sections of society, and all types of people have said that to me. So in terms of that inclusivity, I mean, how do you think the last year has affected that. Will that have a long-term effect, or do you think we just revert back to our, what I would call old-fashioned, there's three dinners a week and, you know, playing golf at the weekend with someone? Ved?
I like to think we were kind of moving away from that old world, and you know, the optimist in me says the last year has actually accelerated that. There are some very obvious candidates where the last year has actually been a big boon, as you said. You know, I think specifically I'd like to point to things like neurodiversity, and I think this kind of working allows each of us to work in exactly the way we'd like to. So that's a big benefit. But obviously, we know, and this again is true in many parts of the world, that this exacerbates the economic divide in some scenarios. Not everybody has a home and office and space to work and have kids and schools and devices for everybody. So I think it's been harsh in some sense for specifically economically disadvantaged people. But on the whole, if I was to take the kind of business view of it, or you know, the kind of world you alluded to, I think it's been reasonably positive. There are specific areas that I think have suffered. We know that there has been a rise in domestic violence. You know, so I think if perhaps anything, we should see that as maybe the pandemic has actually helped shine a torch on some of those problems, and we should take that away and fix it faster. But that's how I see the world. I do know that in our company, being a large organization, we've also seen the emergence of lots of really strong support communities.
Yeah.
I think that's a really big takeaway. You know, single parents sort of helping each other out. You know, story time for kids at 5 o'clock every day, where people take turns. You know, people with you know, mental health challenges, forming communities and helping each other through this. So I think if we can carry some of these beyond the pandemic, that would be you know, to me, that's a big win.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, because I've had that in my own company working for the university. We've seen an increase in productivity over the past year. I think we're reaching a breaking point though, because people can have a certain amount of flexibility, and then they just like collapse, and the schools going back will have a huge impact on that. But there is only a certain amount before people snap, and then they say, well, we can't keep going. But it is an interesting point about how we can adapt and how we've been able to adapt. And back to the previous point, you were saying about only a 4% drop in productivity. And the question is, was all that international travel a waste of time, and was more about satisfying people's egos than it was about actually doing work, which I think is a whole separate question. Yeah, but Melinda.
Yes, I want to go right off what you just said. So from the inclusivity, one thing we always need to know, if we're being exclusive, you need to understand what group that is, right? So I think there's two points. One, we all have found the word resilience has a big elastic capability to it. And I think that the mental health and our resilience and our motivation and all of that has taken such a hit that we're now more open to being compassionate, right? So if you're a CEO and you're a hard driving, pain in the neck kind of person, and all of a sudden your resilience fell apart, you now have I don't want to say, you know, sometimes you have to be hurt or shunned to know somebody else's pain. But we were all put in a situation here where now talking about your mental health is okay, right? It wasn't a year ago to say, oh my goodness, on Tuesdays, man, I cry when I watch the news. You know, what is Nicola going to say? They're going to take my business into the toilet. And I can say that to my staff now, and I can do the wipe of the tear, and I don't feel less, where in the past I might have, right? So that's one. The second is, one of the things I learned in the very, very beginning, CBI did some amazing talks and such. And I can't remember the name of the gentleman, but he said, the world was built for extroverts. The world was built for extroverts. I did not know, because I'm a big E extrovert, that I wasn't being conscious of my introverted colleagues, right? So now I'm a different, like I see my world in a very different way, which includes more inclusivity now, because I'm struggling so hard. I want to go out and kiss everybody. I just want to hug everybody, you know, like I'm nuts. But there's so many people that I work with that they don't find that, they don't want to go back to work. They don't want to go do all those things. And in the before, I couldn't understand that. And now I can. So I'd have to say the inclusivity, because of where we've been put, has given us a broader scope, and a 360-degree view of my world. And I think it's a good thing.
That's absolutely fascinating. I totally can see where you're coming from there, Melinda, because I mean, Richie won't believe this, but I'm a big I, right? I'm a big, actually all of the things, although, you know, I people can have an E bit as well, but I'm a big I. And you know, and all of those dinners and stuff and the networking sessions and stuff like that would sometimes drive me crazy.
But all I want to do is go.
Yeah, you want to go. I can go, and I think I do it well, but it takes such a lot of energy. If you're naturally a theorist, you know, it takes a lot of energy to do that. You still might be able to do it well, but it sucks energy out of you, and you have to recharge. So actually, sitting at home and doing all my work over a screen has been sort of a lot easier for people like me to adapt to than it would be for people like you. So I think it's a really interesting point. The world is built for extroverts, so we all learn to behave like extroverts, don't we? Which doesn't get the most out of everybody. Doesn't get the most out of everybody. Yeah. Richie.
So building on those points, I think my take on it would be that everyone's reality has been different, that there is a danger that we start to try and oversimplify, you know, it's that extrovert versus introvert narrative, or it's those who say they're, you know, that's brilliant working at home and other people are really struggling. In reality, we've all gone through different peaks and troughs at different points. And I think that's really interesting. If you look at, you know, for instance, if you look at the big four accounting firms right now, there's some interesting positioning by different chief executives in that regard as to whether they see their staff returning to an office-based location or not. And I think the reality is people don't know. They don't know what is going to be the right type of blended approach in the future. But what I think is fascinating is there is an opportunity to do some experimentation around it. So there is an opportunity to say, okay, how should we operate in the future? We've gone through this year where I think it speaks more to 1918 than it does 1980 in terms of it, the Spanish flu pandemic, which led to the Roaring Twenties. Are we about to have our similar bit where actually we are a social animal, whether we like it or not, even if that's social interaction is something we like to control a little bit more than others, and do it on our own terms rather than on others. But I think there's something fascinating about how we will want to get back and spend time with people, because even the most extrovert people that I know in my team have recognized that they've benefited in the way that Melinda talked about. And at the other extreme, those people who at the beginning of lockdown were going, well, this is great for me because I'm an introvert and I can just go and hide away. Actually, it has not gone so well, because they've realized they did get energy from other people being around. It's just they didn't need it at full blast all the time.
Yeah.
The second thing I would...
Can I just wonder...
Sorry,
sorry, please. I thought you were done.
I was going to come back to the issue about inclusivity and I suppose more broadly the issue of inclusivity during the pandemic. The thing that I've seen that's been amazing in Scotland has been the collective effort by charities, businesses, government to come together to try and ensure as many people as possible didn't suffer absolute abject exclusion. I was listening to Katie McNeill from Scottish Government this morning talking about the Connecting Scotland programme that they've been doing, which has been about getting devices into the hands of people who didn't have them. It's absolutely inspiring. The work that Alistair Forbes has done with Scotland's Tech Army, mobilizing companies to help other companies understand how to get online. To me, those are the things we want to take away from what we've gone through in the last year, is that sense that people were prepared to help each other.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. Veg, you wanted to say something on that?
One of the things that strikes me is actually the power we have now, which is that because all work happens on digital platforms, to going back to the first point on data, one of the things that we have now is an ability to actually see what's going on. It is eminently possible for an organization to see if someone is disconnected, not engaged, not participating, or working long hours on the weekend, because it's all on digital platforms. And I think that data used appropriately, whether it's direct feedback to the employee or anonymized for the group, can be incredibly powerful to actually fix some of those challenges that in the old world we weren't seeing. As Melinda said, we don't see that around us. But now, the organization as a unit can see that. So I think that there's value in that as well.
Okay, thanks very much. One last question from me to the panel, and then I'll pick up questions from the audience, which I see are arriving in the chat box. I want to turn to skills, and particularly the skills that we're going to need for the next 10, 20, 30 years around technology and innovation. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when my high school abolished the study of logarithms and replaced it with basic computer programming. And we had access to a mainframe in Jordan Hill. Shockingly, this is like 50 years ago when I started high school. So so we've been doing computing science at high school level in Scotland for 50 years, right? And we're still saying we're short of all these skills and everything else. So given a magic wand, what would you change about the high school curriculum in somewhere like Scotland that you think would really enable, one thing to do that would really enable high school pupils to not just be more productive, but have more opportunity and be happier in the world that's arriving? So I'll go back to Melinda on that one.
Stop calling it computer science.
Yeah, well, yeah. Yeah.
I think every subject needs to be digitized, and they are, right? I mean, you even think about it. How many different word writing tools could you do for English? Grammarly, great work. Everybody here, I'm a fan of Grammarly. I couldn't even type anymore if I didn't have that, right? I think we need to help kids understand, and because the kids today, they've grown up with technology. They don't know the difference. But as soon as you call it computer science and you got to go in that room, they're not telling them and teaching them, how does an app work? What are the financials? How come it's only 99p to go get that app? Why does it change all the time? I think we need to bring the real world that we live in into the classroom, like they used to with home economics and those type of things, or cars or woodworking, right? I don't know if you learned how to make a sconce for your wall, but I did, right? I know how to use a hammer, a saw, a tool. Right. We need to give the tools. Learning how to do a spreadsheet is not digital technology. It's just a tool. And I think we could do more creative solution-based teaching around technology, and allow the kids just to think of the art of the possible and how that could all maybe work, but not get down to the details. Oh, you need a JavaScript backend, blah, 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 blah. Because if they can think it, by the time they are employed, there will be technology to make it happen.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Now I'll turn to Ritchie now, because I know he'll have the perfect answer, because of the work that Ritchie and the DDI team have been doing with high schools around Edinburgh. So there you are. I've set you up, Ritchie.
Set me up. So I'm actually going to take a slightly different route, because my colleagues have been looking at it very much as Melinda said there. How do you get children to do data without them thinking it's something slightly cold and analytical and all those sorts of things you would think about. And I think at the heart of what they're trying to do is actually get the children to do more critical thinking. So I think more than anything else, the ability to critique a situation, pick it apart, understand how to ask the right questions rather than try and work out what the right answer is, is the thing that would make the biggest single difference. And colleagues in Moray House and others have been working very hard, particularly with Newbattle School, which is based in Midlothian, so might be perceived as suffering from some forms of exclusion. It's Midlothian Council's first digital academy. It's an absolutely amazing facility. But what they've done is very much, as Melinda's highlighted there, is they're using technology as a tool to help educate, so that, but also they're educating about the tool.
Yes.
And that's a balance. You know, it's one thing to be able to use Zoom. It's another thing to understand how Zoom works. It's one thing to use an app. It's another thing to, it's all that kind of stuff. And in the heart of it, it's about how do I think? How do I understand this? How do I understand systems thinking and pick that apart? And for me, that's the critical thing, that if we're going to really keep feeding what we have, which is this rich vein of people who are coming up with novel ways of addressing things through our tech ecosystem and our other business communities in the region, that ability to be creative within boundaries is what we really need to keep fostering.
Thanks, Richie. Vent.
So obviously, my experience isn't anywhere as close to my fellow panelists on specifically what's happening in Scotland. But maybe if I take a slightly broader look at high school education as we know it, and I think it's, there are shades. It's not fundamentally different in many parts of the world, and I think the problems are very similar. I think I'll call out a few that top of mind for me. The first thing is we've got to get people to start thinking about independent learning. The idea that you only learn when you're in class has to give way to that you're going to learn for the rest of your life. So learning to learn and learning to unlearn and relearn and not be phased when you don't know something, I think is a life skill. I can't underscore numeracy enough, more than computer science or anything else. And you don't have to be a whiz. You have to just be not phobic about numbers, because I think that's something that I think we see a lot of children struggle with. The third one is data, and data is distinct from numeracy. And I think what's interesting in data is, how do you know what's true? How do you, to your critical thinking point, how do we, faced with the deluge of data we have today, are we arming children with the ability to find what's true versus what's rumor? I mean, do we as adults even understand that? When you get 16 messages on WhatsApp, it starts to feel true. And so how do we sift and find truth? I think is a really important skill in the world, especially as we get inundated with things like deepfakes and more sophisticated forms of the sort of gray area between truth and lie, and so on and so forth. And I think that the last one I'd call out, to your point on happiness, I think is I don't think the educational curriculum that I'm aware of focuses enough on self-awareness. I think we're all, our generation certainly was, and I suspect it's still partly true, that we kind of straitjacked a little bit into, so success and survival has these kind of fairly narrow parameters. It is financial, it is to do with jobs and careers. And I think that a little bit more effort about who are you, what makes you, what is the best version of you. And that's and I know that even with AI, we are getting into the realms of subjects like philosophy. And so I think these will become quite important. Asking the why question, not just how do I do this, but why should we do this? What's the value of it to me, to the world? So to me, those are the 3 or 4 things. I absolutely endorse the point on the kind of experiential learning. My daughter's 9. Every time she struggles with spelling, and I'm thinking, does she really need to know the spelling, or will Grammarly, she will never have to spell anything when she's, but then obviously you can't go through life not knowing how to spell. So what's the balance, right? Yeah. I mean, even now she's 9, and my mother, who's been a physics teacher forever, does sort of a weekly just experiments. Let's go measure stuff. Let's go weigh stuff. Let's go And I think that kind of very tactile, real world, because then the numeracy and the critical thinking all comes through that. You don't have to make it into a theory session. So to me, those are some of the biggest things that I can think of.
Okay, that's very interesting. Almost sounds like, we'll go back to a classical Greek education of philosophy, logic, maths. Are some that Archimedes would recognize as an education. And, I very much agree with that. I think we've gone through this world of specialization from, biology to cell biology to people who specialize in tiny areas of cell biology. And in fact, the huge leap forward will come from the people who just don't do that at all. It's just a different approach. Okay, no, very interesting. Can I switch now to some audience questions? So first one I want to pick up is from Karen Towler, and I'll just read her question out. Nick Freer said recently that the holy trinity of Edinburgh's tech scene in 2017, so Skyscanner, Codebase, and the University of Edinburgh School of Informatics, still holds a strong influence today. Is this still the case? But who else is up there with that holy trinity in Edinburgh and Scotland in the tech scene? Who are the real leaders in that? Melinda.
Yeah. I don't know if I can answer that one in the sense of naming companies, but what I will go back to is there are teams, right? Codebase still holds a founders conference call and such, and so they all help each other, right? You've got Malsey, who's in this picture here, that's amazing of what they've done with data and created algorithms for the betterment of retail, right? I mean, they've done such an amazing job. And I'm sure there's, any of the companies that are working with census and IoT and scanners, and then you've got amazing things with, why can't I think of the woman's name? Digital My Way, who's working on new digital medical devices for people who have diabetes. And I mean, there's so many, go to EIE and I walk out, if I could, buzzing with the Holy Trinity, if you want to call it. We're in a group and all of that energy is there to make stuff happen. But the universities are amazing. I find one of the things that I would poke at a little bit on this question is, and this is me just poking out there, are the large vendors, Microsoft, IBM, Cisco, Oracle, Google, are they really underneath making sure that all these different new sector innovation companies, software or not even hardware, are they there to support that growth? That's the one thing I don't see in Scotland, but if I turned around to the US, it'd be all over it, right? I would see it down in London. And it's one of the things that when I talked to Mark Logan on his report, I kept saying, I think we need to tap into some of the larger vendors because of their research capabilities. I mean, I work for IBM, even though Watson Healthcare is now just tipping, but 8 years it was building the most amazing thing, right? And how they shared that. So I don't know if there's a holy trinity anymore. I just think there's a lot of really cool people in Scotland doing good stuff.
It is very different. I talk to my opposite numbers at MIT and Stanford quite regularly. In fact, my opposite number at Stanford sits on my board. She's just joined our board, which is fantastic. And they say, look, don't try and compare yourself to our environments. We can almost, to paraphrase it, sit in our office and people are there with wadges of money looking for to invest in stuff. We haven't got to that point in Scotland. And in the UK, Cambridge probably is the closest. Bits of London and Cambridge and Oxford are the closest to that, but we haven't got there in Scotland yet, but we've got the potential to get there. Ved, I'd be interested in your views on this.
What I see is that the story you tell about, let's say Boston or even some in the Silicon Valley, that's come after, there's a history to that story. And obviously you can't jump to that. But what I do see, and I'm very impressed by, is the kind of, I see in Scotland much, let me say, much more organized policy environment. And I think that's really important because I see that it feels like there's a plan. It feels like there are, these 10 pillars and each pillar is being built. And I think that can only accelerate this journey that we're talking about. Of course, I do echo what Melinda said. We see lots of really interesting startups. We meet lots of interesting, smart, young, mid-sized companies out of Edinburgh and the rest of Scotland that we're always happy to work with. We have a kind of a startup ecosystem that we manage, and we're always kind of pulling them into solutions and stories. But I do think that the policy environment is very conducive in Scotland for some of this to really come through over the next sort of few years.
Okay, thank you. Richie?
So I think we're at a really interesting point. I pick up Ved's point that in terms of comparing ourselves, you often forget the backstory. So the 20 or 30 years of slugging away that led to the point where you're famous. And the thing I would say about that sort of holy trinity or that triumvirate is you've got to look at how much of that legacy is being reinvested into the ecosystem. So, well reported Skyscanner, the fact that Mark has written his recent report about how to help the system, and it is now committed to helping drive that forward with government, I think is absolutely brilliant. The fact that he and his fellow directors that were in Skyscanner have often reinvested their own money in local firms, those are the things that start to drive out the next opportunities for company growth. And let's remember that for every one Skyscanner, there's 100 firms started, but only one of them managed to scale. Many firms have been very successful, but had a strategy of wanting to cash out, which is entirely fine. That's an absolutely perfect opportunity, business model to follow. It's about understanding what they then do, and what I think we need to do, and why this is still holding such strong influence, is continue to encourage people to want to stay here. And I think the benefit we've got is we've got an incredibly strong quality of life. We've got lots of people who want to support each other to be successful. The Founders Club that Melinda talked about, and other environments, which is brilliant. Do we have another Skyscanner? I'm sure we do. We just don't know who they are yet. And the interesting thing is, it will be about, as they start to emerge, how does the community get behind them?
Yeah. I mean, I think the Logan report picked up, didn't it, Richie? The whole tech scaler approach, which is trying to help that. How do we scale? I mean, it's always been the issue in the UK, isn't it? We actually I think I saw some data from the Scale Up Institute a few years ago saying Britain produces as many new companies as the US does per head. It's just that most of them don't have any employees. And it's we just form companies and then just leave them. We don't scale. It's a perennial issue.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll just pick up. The next question is from Robert Stewart. So Robert's asking, do you think companies are ready to make the change to a blended approach? And I think he means by that, home working, mixture of home and office working. How many companies do you think have actually asked their workforce, instead of focusing on figures, what is the human cost to factor into? Melinda?
Yeah, I can answer this one. We ask our employees every 3 months, would you come back? And we're starting to see the scale, right? So in the beginning it was like, no, now we're starting to see a difference, right? So CodeClan is very much into the culture of us being inclusive. And if you aren't at your best, you can't be the best, right? So we are very, very geared towards that. Now, on the flip side, from a work perspective at CodeClan, we've got to figure out whether we're always going to have half remote and half on campus, and find the balance. But I agree with Robert's question here, is focusing on the figures versus the human factor to it. We have to weigh that in now. We have to. To your point of, it was always horrible that someone couldn't go home and be with their kids. and now they're with their kids, right? And that
No, they want to go back to the
dogs.
office.
We're all talking about the puppy dogs that are now going to have total, rip your house apart. Imagine the cost of your dog ripping your house apart because you went to work. So I do think there's a huge conversation here. And in mine, I don't even think I'm gonna get half my employees to come back. I'm gonna have to like pry them out. But I do think that every company's got to ask this. And if you look at all of the properties that are, especially in Edinburgh, how many properties have been downsized?
Yes.
We now have a different innovative challenge of what to do with all of those workspaces that are now not being occupied and used to, from a climate perspective.
Yeah, I had just actually managed the university pulled together a fantastic new office for us. We are 120 people. I spent 2 years pushing for us to have our own home because we were scattered all over the place. And then we had about a year in there, and then we went into lockdown. And now I've actually asked the staff as well. I've said, what do you want to do? And the answer is getting back there. We'll probably need half the space that we've got. We'll still do, 2 days in the office, 2 days at home, a day out with, visits with suppliers, customers, and so on. And the 2 days at home and in the office can also be swapped for time spent out with our academic colleagues, because that's most of what our team do. So I'll need far less actual office space. But our academic staff will always need more office space, so that's fine. We can swap for them. They're always looking for more. Richie.
I would echo what's already been said. I think the critical thing here, and the point I think Robert was asking about the human cost, is it's about the relationship you have with your teams. Mm-hmm. So it's understanding the absolute narrative that they have, in that there will be some who really do want to work from home a few days a week more than they might have otherwise been afforded. Others who will be desperate to be in a social environment again for a variety of reasons, not all of which are particularly nice to think about. Mm-hmm. I think open dialogue is really important. And it's also linking it back to why are we here? So there's a bit about the mission. So for an organization if we accept that we've slightly been in a state of stasis, albeit it's one that has felt like we've been changing all the time, in many regards, many things have been sort of held in aspect for a while. Do we need to reimagine what our mission is in terms of what we're trying to achieve, to afford our workforces the opportunity to reimagine their place in that? Mm-hmm. As you've highlighted, George, we've been doing similar things with our teams, doing surveys, and as with Melinda, at the beginning they were all going, "Oh, this is great, and I don't have to. I'm saving so much time." Now they're going, "No, I really would like to spend time with people. I want a change of environment. I'm happy if it's only a few days a week." And that may change. I fully expect that to change again. So I think the ultimate answer is we just need to be reflective and make sure that we're listening.
Okay, cheers, Richard. Ved.
So this is a really interesting question for us. Just to remind you of the context here, we are, we've 450,000 people across the world, and many of our employees work for financial services customers. They work in offices that are physically secured. I, as a TCS employee, cannot walk into those spaces unless I have a special pass. We've had to move all of those people away from those offices to their homes. We've had to shift desktops to people's homes, and we've created this whole model called secure borderless workspace. That's all worked fine. What we've actually taken a call on, and I think this is really interesting, as a company, we've decided this is actually going to be a fulcrum for shifting to our new operating model. And we've called this out to say we have something called 25 by 25, which is that going forward, we are going to shift to a model where no more than 25% of people should be in an office at any given point of time. And for any individual, no more than 25% of your time should be spent in an office. Right? So we've we've embraced this model and said, now that we've made this shift, this is the way we are going to work, which I think the next challenge therefore becomes, how should we rethink our offices? If you're actually going in there not to do work as you do, but actually to get those interactions, then obviously you don't want chairs and tables and cubicles. You want more collaborative spaces. You only want to go there to do the brainstorming and meet people. So I think it's going to call for a big rethink of spaces. And to the human cost point, I think we will have to discover multiple communication modes. And I'll give you my personal example that, I tend not to get involved in my colleagues' personal lives. Just it's a style of working, right? But over the last 12 months, I mean, I can tell you who's baked what, who's been running, who's been cycling, who's been, had sleepless nights over, because we've had to build that. We've had to build a second layer of communication because a lot of people live by themselves. So that getting our arms around each other, metaphorically, to kind of make that happen has become a very important part. I think that's the only way you can address the human cost aspect. It can't be just mechanical.
No, okay. No, that's a very good point. We're looking at complete redesign of our office space. Like you said, having a socializing space, but then having almost individual little soundproof booths, so people can have meetings like this in there, because you can't have meetings like this in an open office. You'll drive everyone will get driven crazy if that happens. So it'll be like a fundamental redesign, and I still expect people to be having meetings like this, well, forever now, because we've proven it works. It's very efficient. I mean, the idea of getting, even in a small geographical area like Edinburgh, to get 6 people from different units together for a physical meeting at Old College, where Ritchie's background is, we all have to travel, walk, taxi, bike, whatever, and it's really complicated. And now we can just say, oh, the machine will sort it. Machine will sort it. Much easier, much easier. I'll just throw in one question from me, and then we'll finish with one very practical question from the audience. So one for me is, if you look at the sectors of the economy, particularly in the Scottish economy, which sector do you think would really benefit most now from the use of data? Something that could be really transformational if they properly adopted the use of data. Who's the furthest behind that could have the biggest transformational effect? I'm going to start with Richie on this one. Just asking you the easy questions, Richie.
Just ask me the easy question. See which part of the audience I can piss off the most. So from my perspective, I'm going to slightly duck your question, but there's a reason for it, which is I actually think the biggest opportunity in Scotland from data is about better supply chain management. And that's agnostic of sector. So that could be construction, it could be retail, it could be farming. But what has become clear to me in engaging with lots of companies when we've been talking about what's going on with data is how little data flows between organizations as part of their contracting. I won't name names, but a particular organization that's involved in distribution doesn't know necessarily what goods are going to arrive on its sites from organizations that it's helping distribute goods for until the lorry arrives at the gate. Now, that's not because they're inefficient or bad or badly organized. It's just that the way that they've contracted in the past hasn't required that level of detail. But actually, if they had it, there are benefits both in productivity, space utilization, handling, because some of these things, some of the goods are time sensitive. And I suppose we're seeing that in relation to some of the apocryphal pictures after the new year with our fishing industry, where fish were going bad because the data required to allow goods to flow across the border were not in, the systems were not in place. So for my thing, it's that bit between, the company that comes up with how you can digitize doing a transfer agreement for goods to Europe is going to make millions. If they can do that as a digital service that you could do in minutes, they will make a lot of money. So for me, that's where I would see the biggest benefit in Scotland. Okay,
thanks very much. Vent?
So we work across a number of industries, and obviously there are industries which perforce have to be in the data. But if you're a if you're in media or banking, your world is data. So we'll put those aside. I think the more infrastructure oriented you are, the more likely it is that data is a bigger problem, because it has been harder for those industries to get datafied. Utilities, infrastructure providers, I think, are in the mix. I think environment and sustainability is the next big data gold mine, where we can make giant leaps. And again, to Richie's point, this is not an industry specific or company specific, it's everybody's problem. And that leads me to this thing that the way we see the world also is that we're moving from a world where the primary economic unit was the firm to a world where actually the primary economic unit may be the ecosystem, and the ecosystem flourishes or fails. And again, to Richie's point, I think the way we start to look at data as it flows across ecosystems, whether it's the transport ecosystem or the logistics ecosystem or the healthcare ecosystem, that's going to be more important. And I go back to sustainability because Scotland has a very large green-blue economy. And I think that will play very well to the Scottish economy as well. So I think Scotland could be a leader in the environmental sciences areas, businesses, and do a lot with the data that is already probably there. So it's a lot of it is actually connecting rather than actually extracting data.
Okay, thank you. Melinda?
Don't disagree with either of these two very smart men, but I'm going to throw one out there, the judicial systems, the federal courts.
Don't mention judicial systems at the moment in Scotland.
Oh, yeah, well, let's not even talk about that game. But I'm just talking about the process.
Yeah.
The process is not digitized to levels that could make it even efficient, right? Not even productive. There's efficient and then productive, right? The backlog because of COVID now, if you were caught in a low-level crime and you just got caught in it because your buddy drove the car or whatever, you're sitting someplace with no even idea when your future can be your future. And so there is, to me, it is the ripest place that is still so backwatered in a technology and data construct that we can't move all these other things unless that moves along with us, because we'll be sitting in courts forever trying to figure out fraud and all, So I'd say the judicial system.
Oh, that's a very interesting one. That's very interesting answer. Yeah, cool. I'm glad you steered well away from gun cases. Yeah, but you're right. People still are carrying in big bundles of paper tied up in ribbon.
Did you ever hear it? It's what did they tell me? It's a petabyte of data per case. And I'm trying to remember what kind, like a murder or something like that. I get the right words. But a petabyte of data. Oh my goodness. You gotta have all these little data warehouses all around just to close a court case. So we have to think more like, okay, it's that jurisdiction. We just plug that in, versus somebody's typing all that stuff in.
Yeah.
So there's so much to do there, so much to do. And it's so data heavy. It's all data heavy, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that because of video? Because petabyte suggests that there's a lot of video content in there. Is that the case?
Yes. Well, you think about it. If you crash your car, there's the picture of your car beforehand, the picture of the accident, picture of your body, a picture of this. So there's pictures, there's videos, there's text, there's everything. It's a great place that needs innovation, right? And then you're dealing with insurance companies. Go back to Ritchie's supply chain. That insurance company's got to send all that data to somebody else, who then sends it to a lawyer, that then sends it to. So there's a lot to work there.
Okay, thank you. That's a very informative answer, that one. That'll have me thinking now as well. So just finish with one very quick question from the audience, and it's literally a 30-second answer I'm looking for here. If you each had one innovation or new idea to help us all with remote working, what would it be? Richie. I'll go straight to Richie, yeah.
So for me, it would be shared office. And by that, I mean, multiple organizations sharing their offices, allowing their staff to work in them, so that you don't have to travel as far to get to somewhere where you could have a meeting. Now it may be called Starbucks for all we know, or Costa, but I think we will need spaces that people can go to, but not necessarily ones that are branded by the company we work for.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's an interesting one. Yeah. Melinda?
Childminders.
Robotic childminders.
No, in general, culturally, Scotland doesn't use babysitters as prevalent as we did in the US. I mean, I was a childminder, even though the parent was still there at age 8, just to play with the other kids
and stuff. Yeah.
Right. So, and I wasn't a family member. So one of the things here, Scotland, man, you're all using grandparents, which got cut out because of COVID, right? In that sense, family members, you can't travel. So I go to the remote working that we get back to kids that babysit.
Yeah, let's just throw out the easy ones here. Okay, Ved.
I have to start by saying to Melinda that I do know of someone who watches his nephew and niece on a Zoom across the Atlantic while the parents are out. So it's possible. Think about it. There are opportunities there. But to your point, I would probably go for a desk I would go for a desk that can put itself into an exercise station as well, so that while we're stuck at our desk for like 12 hours a day, it will force us to change position, to stand up, to sit down, and sort of sometimes it won't give us the choice to get ourselves moving.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks very much. So,
George, what's about yours?
Oh, mine. Oh, thanks. No, I'm asking the question. Look, I'm asking the questions. Oh, that's terrible. That's it. Do you know?
Got you back. Sorry.
You've got me back. Actually, you've got me for once, and Richie will notice I'm never short for a word or two. Technology, a little soundproof. Actually, I saw it the other day. I do some home recording, and there's this little thing to buy which is called an individual recording booth, right? And I thought it was a spoof. I thought it was a joke, because it's like a little box that you put over your head, and it's used for recording. And I'm thinking, I can actually use about a dozen of those for the office, because that's what we need for people having meetings like this. And you just basically wheel your chair under with your laptop, and you pull this box down from the wall, and it on a spring, and it fits over your head and shoulders, and it isolates you from the rest of the room. And it sounds crazy, but that's actually all you need. You don't need to build like a whole new suite of booths and offices. You just need something that isolates you from the rest of the office for half an hour while we have a call like this. So that's my answer. So I did come up with an answer.
So ultimately, because this is a circular discussion, we've come back to the original question raised by Ved, which is how are we going to reuse all the Amazon delivery boxes?
Yeah, that's very good. Yeah, we don't need to buy them. We can just build them out of layers of cardboard boxes.
I did have this vision of an office full of people with these boxes. It doesn't make a pretty picture, but who knows?
That's the perfect wind up to the conversation, Richie. Thanks very much, and thank you very much to Melinda, to Richie, and to Ved. That's been really interesting. And I love being on this side asking the questions, as you can tell. It makes a change from work. And I want to hand over back now to Robert, who's going to wind up the session.
Thank you very much.
Hope so.
Well, look, that was Absolutely fascinating, and thank you for an enjoyable 90 minutes that's just gone at the flick of a switch. All this talk of petabytes, it was very interesting for us in OpenReach because we had the biggest bandwidth day ever during February, where we consumed 213 petabytes of data in one evening. That's triple what we've been doing before. If you think back to pre-lockdown state, so all this discussion of data is actually being consumed. I don't know what they're consuming it on. We believe it's gaming and lots of other things, but we'll say who cares. The network is holding firm, and I think all of industry is delighted about the shift. And I think your observations around how we've automatically morphed and accelerated life, we all had the plans for the future, but I think we've all accelerated them. And I'm with you. I'm on the fence in terms of what the new world looks like. And I think us at OpenReach, we've got our buildings, but we've also got our engineers out in the field, and we're going into uncharted territory in terms of what does the new world look like. But look, what a fantastic afternoon. I just want to echo thanks on behalf of the Chamber to say Edinburgh Chamber of Commerce and OpenReach, thank you for a very interesting and really great opportunity to discuss tech and data. Again, just to say thank you to the illustrious panel, and George, your chairing was great, kept the flow going really well, and I was really taken by a huge amount of the conversation. I think I was struck also by the focus around it's not just about the data itself, it's all about the emotional side, the inclusivity of data and how we use it and shape it, and it can go in a million different directions clearly, but what was clear was collaboration sounded to be the key thing. We heard lots of good examples about how collaboration is working, and it's something that I know from a Scottish perspective we're very strong on. The desire to collaborate is key. Again, just leaves me to say thank you to our panel and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Take care now.